The next trillion-dollar revolution isn't in crypto or AI. It's happening right under our noses.
It was 1990, starting with Capital One, to 2010 was the decades of fintech. We believe we're entering the decades of health tech.
But as billions pour into longevity and wellness, a darker reality emerges.
We see ridiculous junk science claims. We see things that are 50 times the price they should be. We can't let this happen.
What if the answer isn't living longer at any cost, but living better on your own terms?
Joyspan is our way of saying the trade-off between health, happiness, wellness that every person can make for themselves.
While celebrity gurus cash in on desperate hope.
Somebody else is funding Tony Robbins and Brian Johnson and David Sinclair, and we want to scream about that.
Two mission-driven VCs are building the alternative.
Fund 1 was a way to lay the foundation. Fund 2, we're going to be doing 6, all in the areas of relative to health and wellness.
Can venture capital protect our health from charlatans? Discover how Exceptional Ventures is funding the future of joyful longevity, one science-backed investment at a time.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today, I bring two friends of the podcast on the show, and that is, of course, Paolo Pio and Matt Cooper, both from Exceptional Ventures, the founding GPs. Welcome, guys, to the pod.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas. It's great to see you.
So, guys, today we'll start out with your story, the two of your story, and then leading that into how you see the world needing exceptional ventures. And then after that, a bit about a concept that you call Joyspan. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Let's start with your story. Tell me, how did Exceptional Ventures come about in the beginning?
Yeah, fantastic. Maybe, I can get started and give you some of my background and then how I got to meet Matt and together set up the fund. As you can clearly hear, I'm originally Italian and I studied in Turin. I did my engineering degree. So my background is technological. And I went for my first job in San Francisco at Cisco as a software engineer back in 2006. So I started my career with them. I was at Cisco for 13 years, moving progressively towards more the business side of the industry. So from software engineering into product management, and then eventually closing in a business development role, looking after Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. At the end, I also did an executive MBA here in London, knowing I like finance and really to learn more about it and explore areas of it. So I looked into asset management, venture capital, private equity, and hedge funds, and fell in love with venture capital, which is, I realized, the intersection of investments with technology, with building a product that, as an engineer, I really like. So I decided to move into venture, and this was back in 2017. I started making angel investments. So in London, little by little, building my network, attending all the entrepreneurial meetups, I went in the areas that were my passion. So I did angel investments in the areas of health and wellness. I've been reading a lot about nutrition, meditation, fitness. I started actually also a fitness group in London. I certified as an instructor. We still run the group 10 years after starting it. And those first investments actually led me to meet an American health and wellness fund called Joyous Partners. They wanted to expand in Europe. Early 2019, we met. They were looking for a managing director to lead this expansion. We liked each other, and I joined them. So I launched their European fund. And, we did very well in the period I was with them, making a lot of investments across the main European countries, hired a team, London-based primarily, with venture partners in the main hubs in the areas of health, wellness, future of food. And eventually in 2021, I then also met Matt under the recommendation of someone that said, you guys should speak because you have a lot in common. Little did you know it was the case. And we started talking about health, wellness. Matt is a mental health interested as well as advocate, very vocal. is also very interested about longevity, about supplements. You can see his supplement stack, but
Yes, I can see it back there. It is back there. Yeah.
well, oh, that's like a
But as we joked, you can see two things, right? You can see my wine cabinet. Here, we'll talk about what we call Joyspan, and you can see my supplement stack. So there's some irony in my kitchen here.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I was looking for my next role, and together we did actually a couple of investments in these areas, and then we thought we could do our own fund, but specifically that would be a mission-driven fund, where the mission would be to help people live a longer, healthier, and happier life. And off we went, early 2022, fundraising for what eventually became our Fund 1, that has now been almost fully deployed, and we are about to launch Fund 2 this summer, as you know.
I mean, it's sort of a relief, Andreas. We're going to be on the same podcast because I often will say that I'm Paolo's older, fatter, balder partner. But in this case, the baldness, at least, of the three, we've got the majority. So I'm pleased to say that. I mean, my story is a little less intentional than Paolo's. I mean, he jokes that it's obvious that he's Italian. It's at least as obvious that I'm American. I grew up there. And from the time I was a little boy, I wanted to be a scientist. That's all I ever wanted to be. And I joke with people that I had delusions of grandeur. So when I say scientist, I wanted to be Albert Einstein. I wanted to win a string of Nobel Prizes. I wanted to be Thomas Edison. I wanted to invent things that would change the path of human history. And while I was at it, I wanted to teach people, because every time, I would tell somebody else that was in school with me that I love science, they would say, yuck. And I thought that was just because they weren't being taught well enough. So that was what I wanted to do. Went off to university, studied chemistry and physics. Only summer job I ever had. See, Paolo's the career is much more intentional than mine. I spent 6 summers working in a theme park because it never occurred to me that I would have any sort of job that required any sort of experience. I had an epiphany when I went to university. I went to Princeton in the States, so I was lucky. I went to a great research institution, and I met a guy who was my best friend in university, who put me in my place. And I realized I wasn't going to win a string of Nobel Prizes because my best friend at university had won the World Math Olympiad when he was in high school. And I had won the New Jersey Math League, which is a very small part of the world. So I was faced with this realization that I was going to be a mediocre scientist or a good scientist, but not the uber scientist. I also was lucky enough to do a year of lab work and realize, A, that I wasn't that good at it, and B, that I was surrounded by, at that time, this is the late 80s, bitter old white men struggling for grant money, and that it wasn't quite the idea that I'd had. So I realized I wasn't going to do what I'd wanted to do since I was a kid. I went off and I ended up falling into management consultancy because at that time they were starting to hire science and maths people and say, okay, look, if you're a good problem solver, we'll show you how to do that in business. So I went out and bought a very cheap suit, a very cheap tie, interviewed with a management consultancy, bizarrely got a job. The rest is an accident. I fell into the financial service practice, worked with a couple of guys, and ended up co-founding Capital One Bank in the U.S., which is, now depending on what measure you use, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th largest bank in America. And is widely regarded as the world's first fintech. I mean, in the late 80s, we built a database working with Oracle that was 4 times the size of the biggest that the U.S. government ran at the time. And I joke because you can probably fit on your phone now, but at the time, it took us 2.5 years to build, and nothing like it had ever been done. The words big data didn't exist yet, targeted marketing didn't exist yet, fintech didn't exist yet. And so, accidentally, suddenly I became part of the world's first fintech business and, teaching business school cases all around the world and such. I was there for 13 years. We floated in 94. I left in 2001. At the time, the goal was to become a global lender, which is what brought me to London as an American. So I ran Capital One Bank Europe, which had, it's very American of us, but it had Canada and South Africa in it, as well as the UK, Spain, Italy, and France, but we called it Capital One Bank Europe, and I ran that for 3 years. I left in 2001 because we'd become quite a big company. So we had, 60 million customers, 20,000 employees, and I just really realized I wasn't having as much fun as I'd had before. And that sounds strange, but I hadn't thought about being a banker. I hadn't thought about being in financial services. It was an accident anyway. So I left with no idea what I wanted to do, and gradually decided that I didn't have an idea that I wanted to pursue to be an entrepreneur a second time. And I sort of went back to the roots of thinking about teaching and so forth. I decided what I wanted to do was advise entrepreneurs and help them learn from what I had done well or poorly, what I'd seen others do well or poorly. It's 2001, so everybody said, well, that's a nice idea, Matt, but there are no entrepreneurs in the UK. There might be 2 or 3 in California. Maybe you should go there. But London was home. And so I stayed, and I was lucky, and I met a few. One of the companies that some people know is a business called Octopus Capital, which is an investments in energy business here. I met the founders of that before or as they were setting up, and ended up chairing that business for 20 years. And because it was a small pond, it was easy, I think, then to build a reputation. So I started working with a number of entrepreneurs in different industries, advising and being quite a generalist. Never intended, unlike Paolo, who was very intentional, never intended to be an investor. I liked advising. I liked teaching. I thought of myself like a teacher who wanted to work with gifted children. So finally, the guy, the woman who's going to be the best CEO ever, and help them get there a little faster by not making the same mistakes I made or that someone else made. Then one day it occurred to me that if I were working with you, let's say, and I thought you were a brilliant entrepreneur, building a great business, which for me meant commercially and in terms of doing something good for the world, and I thought I was helping, and we were raising money, why wouldn't I invest? So I fell into angel investing, and to make a long story short, over 20 years, made 300 angel investments, which I thought made me the most prolific angel in the UK until somebody shouted at this table and said they had 350. So now I say one of the most prolific. They were following my nose, things I was interested in, where I was meeting great entrepreneurs. So they were more B2C than B2B. They were more tech heavy, but not, hardcore tech. That's not my expertise, but very diverse in terms of fields. And I was very happy doing that until I met Paolo. And then out of my mouth, when he was looking for a job, came the words, seems like you want to start a fund. Maybe we should do that together. So we did. And I guess, important to take a step back, because leading up to that, I was doing more and more health investments. The thing I left out from when I was a little boy, I always had a fear of death that was inexplicable. I had a father who was a doctor. I was the world's least sporty human because although my dad was a doctor, he was very cerebral. He wasn't the kind of dad who was going to teach you to throw a ball. So sports and fitness came way later for me. But the science background and interest in health and wellness, and I guess what we share is we see a revolution happening in the world. So if, it's 1990, starting with Capital One to 2010 was, the decades of fintech. We believe we're entering the decades of health tech. Where we see, existing systems breaking down. We see an aging population. Maybe most importantly, we see these crazy advances in our understanding of the human body and the way that it works, how to keep it well, how to realize much more quickly that it either might be likely to get sick or is getting sick, and ways to treat and influence that. And so, we set up Exceptional Ventures, I think, not so much because we wanted to be a VC. I certainly never wanted to be a VC. Paolo said, he decided he wanted to be a VC. The last thing I wanted to be, but I want to be somebody who helps drive that change forward, because I think that we're seeing a revolution in the way that health gets, that people think about health, the opportunities that are available to stay well, to get well if you begin to get ill. And we see a revolution afoot, and we want to drive that and help be part of it. And we happen to have an expertise in investing. So here we are, driving that forward. Our mission is to drive it forward. We do it by finding the best entrepreneurs and linking them with the best investors. So we think about ourselves as just another entrepreneur in that space.
Let's pick up on the structural things first, so to say, the things that underpin how you think about venture at Exceptional and how you're different from the others in the market.
I think, when we set out, we had a vision in mind, which was around really building a firm that would become the health and wellness fund over the next 15 to 20 years. And Fund One was a way to lay the foundation for that. And ideally, we wanted to build a prolific firm. For example, Fund One decided to do 35 to 40 investments. We are now almost at 40. With Fund Two, we're going to be doing 60. All in the areas of relative to health and wellness, so that one company can get this part of the solution, the other company can get the other parts of the solution, and we can bring them together. We can make those connections between our founders and with our LPs, and they can actually go and build a solution together, or one becomes a distributor of another. And that has happened time and again in our community. So one part is that. And also the other thing is that we really wanted to be on the side of the entrepreneurs. this is something that Matt also often talks about, as he's been had his engine career for more than 20 years. And so not really wanting to impose ourselves on boards by the way of meeting rounds, but really wanting to support founders throughout their journey.
So it's funny because I think, Andreas, like any two founders, we now tell the same story, but we arrived at it in really different ways, right? So Paolo wanted to be a VC, wanted to do it in health and wellness, and wanted to build a franchise, as he just says. Most of that had never occurred to me. I was happy being an angel, doing investments where I felt like doing them, doing more and more in health because that's where I saw opportunity and it's an area that I love, but without that kind of intentionality, right? So the day that I said, hey, Paolo, why don't we think about doing a fund? It was partly as an enabling of what he wanted to do, because I'm spent 20 years helping entrepreneurs do what they want to do. It wasn't that I'd sat at home and said, oh my goodness, I want to be a VC, or I want to launch a fund, or I want to build a franchise, or any of those things. I like to tell this story because Paolo asked me to talk to a couple of his friends at the time. And I thought it was just kind of to say hello, get to know each other better. It was very clear that although I had all this experience and I thought I was making this nice offer to help, they were grilling me to see if I was a good enough human being to work with their friend Paolo. And that was a big statement to me about the guy that I might be working with, because I'm very picky about, as they were obviously being, about integrity and the kind of people, it's been 25 years since I had to work with anybody I don't want to work with. So that was a big statement. So then when we say we think we might set up this fund, I suddenly, for the first time, I have to ask myself, am I good at this? Right? Now, I'm kind of, I'm an arrogant enough guy. I think I'm a good investor. I think I'm a good helper. But Paolo said, so what's your track record? I'm like, I don't have any idea. Never had to think about it. Never had to measure it. Now, suddenly you have to say, well, why are you good at this thing that you do? And most VCs talk about, being good at evaluating a market or having a specific expertise in an area. And I thought to myself, okay, I'd like to tell people that, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and I can evaluate an entrepreneur better than anybody else can. And I've looked at more markets and more business plans than anybody else can. That all might be true, but I think it forced me to do some self-questioning. And I believe that the way that you win in this business against other VCs, and if you want to change the world, is by attracting the best entrepreneurs, because they get funded no matter what. And so I think it's all about reputation. It's all about having integrity, doing what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it, and maybe most importantly, being able to add real value. We did is, as Paolo said, set up Exceptional Ventures. We now agree that we want to build a franchise and do fund after fund. We agree that we want to change the world of human health, help people live, longer, healthier, and happier. And then that we're going to do that. And the reason we're going to do it better than anybody else is because the best entrepreneurs, when they're setting up their business and they're thinking, whose money and whose involvement do I want? They're going to say Exceptional Ventures. And so everything we do is wrapped around, on one hand, the mission of changing the world, by doing that, by being the place where the best entrepreneurs come. And so I think that's really important. And the irony, I suppose, is like selling to financial services at Capital One. And nobody in 1990 would have argued that retail banks were the smartest, toughest competitors in the world. This was around the time when Bill Gates had launched Microsoft. I mean, the smart guys were fleeing to tech already. They weren't setting up banks. So, it's nice to compete against people who maybe, aren't that impressive. And so you and I have talked before, I can be really rude about VCs. A lot of VCs are people who have no entrepreneurial experience and none of the skills that it takes to be an entrepreneur. They're not experts in the fields that they're looking at. Their main motivation is to make money for themselves and secondarily for their LPs. And that all sounds trite and it sounds, unduly cruel. But, literally an hour before we had this conversation, a company that we're talking to, and the founder is a founder I previously invested in, which is an example of, this kind of attracting, keeping the best, got an offer from a VC that said, well, we know you're asking X million pound valuation, but we'll give you 3/4 of that, but you have to decide today. It's an exploding offer. If you don't decide today, you can't have it. Why would you do that? If you're confident in the product you're offering, why would you do that? That's unethical to me. So now he faces this quandary. I don't really like these guys. They're being unethical to me, but I've got the money. And what happens if I continue and I don't get the money? And we find VCs acting in all kinds of ways that we don't find admirable. And we think that the very, very best entrepreneurs don't have to accept and should never accept. And they should be looking not just for money, but they should be looking for people who understand and care about their missions. They can contribute and add value to their success by either bringing other great investors or adding value to strategy or what have you. And that's just not what we see.
You're very much obviously preaching to the choir when you say this to me. And I also, like, one of the reasons why I've co-founded EUVC with David was I said, I had some realizations that told me very much that we do absolutely need to improve the state of best practice in European venture. We definitely need to create more champions in European venture so that it's clearer who are the people to mimic, who are the people to learn from, and then connect the ecosystems as well, because it is a disparate ecosystem that we have in Europe, where there is far from one ecosystem to the other. If you're not embedded like the three of us here on the podcast, well, I can reach out to people in Paris. Most people in Denmark cannot. Most people in Bucharest cannot reach out to someone outside of Bucharest, or at least they think they can. I'd love to ask you, though, that because I do think there's one thing where when you have recognized this situation of European venture or venture anywhere, because I think performance is similar in the US as it is here, so maybe they're a bit better, but it's not necessarily on the performance side. I think it is a pervasive problem in general. Most sectors, most verticals, most anything have a lot of people that are not as good as the rest. I'd love to ask you, you're running a bit of a follower strategy, meaning that you don't want to do the lead tickets. And I love that. I applaud that. I love models like this. So there's nothing bad around that. But it does mean that you come to a table where there are already other people sitting around it.
So I think, I think that's a little bit of a misperception, if I might. So, I mean, again, just the last thought on this other subject. When I was at Capital One for 13 years, I spent 13 years telling people, I'm not a banker and we're not a bank, right? And eventually we were followed by tech analysts. We were a public company. We were followed by tech analysts. I hate saying to people when they say, what do you do? Saying I run a VC fund, because they have all kinds of preconceptions about what that means I do, how I do it, what kind of person I am. Those preconceptions aren't always true, but preconceptions originate somewhere, right? And so people assume that I'm not an entrepreneur. They assume that I'm greedy. They assume whatever they assume. And so, back to your point. So a couple of things. One is, when you talk about performance, right? I mean, venture as a category is a good performing asset class. And there's a wide disparity between the best and the worst. But, an example would be a lot of VCs say, if I'm top quartile, I'll deliver you 3 times your money. Isn't that great? Well, I don't know about you. I never wanted to be top quartile at anything that I ever did. And I wouldn't invest in an entrepreneur who said, I want to be top quartile. Are you crazy? We invest in entrepreneurs who say, I want to change the world. I do want to be Albert Einstein. I do want to be Thomas Edison. I want to be Bill Gates, or I want to, and so we're the same. We don't want to be top quartile. We want to be number one. Of course, there's some noise in that. But if we say we want to be in the top 5%, we've got to deliver 8 times return. So we don't walk around saying 3 would be good. So I think there's when you talk about quality, on one hand, there's that there's quality of output, which is a VC, part of it's always going to be return. Okay, yes. Part of it is we want to drive this revolution of healthcare change. Part of it is we want to be, beloved by entrepreneurs so that we continue to get the best ones and continue to get the best outputs. It's all a circle anyway. None of which addresses your question about leading. I mean, we're an early stage investor. We're a seed and pre-seed investor. And so a lot of those rounds are less structured than later rounds. Some have leaders, some don't. We've made 36 investments. 35 of those have been referred to us either by a friend, a colleague, an entrepreneur we already know, or they were all direct referrals. So that's that positive filtering. Only one was an outbound reach out. 20 of those were first fund in. So, it's a misnomer to say we're a follower. We're often first fund in. We then bring a lot of other money with us because we have friends, other funds, other high net worths, people we trust and will vouch for. So we write a minority ticket, but we and people we bring along might account for a majority. So we might bring the lead. In fact, several of our companies that have then gone on to do A rounds, we've brought the lead to the table. So, lead as a formal legalistic lead, maybe no. lead as a, bringer of capability, bringer of money, bringer of expertise, always.
So it's more actually a byproduct of your fund size and the number of tickets that you want to do compared to the actual role that you take in the investments.
Yeah, I think it's also a, what are we good at? So, do we what? No, that's not even right. It's what matters. Do we create value by squeezing the terms? Yes, of course we care. We want to make sure the structures are right. Paolo's more expert than I am in formal VC. I've been writing angel checks for 25 years. So of course we care, but we could spend time on that, or we could spend time understanding the business and the sector and adding value and advising the entrepreneur. We could spend our time saying we need to be a lead so we can have a board seat so that we can sit around and watch out for our own interest sitting on your board. Or we could say, we're so confident that we add value that we know you're going to call us in anyway. We don't have to demand a board seat. We know that we're going to be more involved with you and your business than the guy who's bought himself a board seat. We know that when you need help, you're going to fly across the world to see me or see Paolo. And so, the words get confusing because we would say that for all of our investments, they would see us as the lead in terms of adding value, adding strategy, giving advice, bringing other investors. And yet in terms of, being the constructor of the final term sheet, yeah, if necessary, but not uniquely skilled at nor work our time.
We do get involved with our portfolio companies quite a lot, and Matt loves that, and in a way that's his mission. On the contrary, from the other firms that was coming before, it was about putting a check in and then I don't see you anymore. Let the entrepreneurs run. We don't want to be bothered. And because it's too time consuming. But in a way, I really saw the opposite, and how much actually the help can really support young founders that might be incredibly experienced at something, but completely not at something else. So in other words, we love running up our sleeves. And Matt does it time and again on certain areas. I do it on other areas with our portfolio companies, and it's 35 right now. And it certainly poses the question, as we scale, how do we scale this support? And we're putting things in place so that we can. And we are hired a young team that we are grooming right from junior position to mid-level position for Fund 2, and ideally into partner position for Fund 3. The idea is going to be 2028, so that we can continue this, because that's the culture that we want to bring into our firm, right?
I think it's really important to talk about what involvement is, right? Because for most VCs, involvement is a seat on the board, right? It's a seat on the board, so that they get to read the board minutes. They have that place to pontificate. Some of them don't even read the board minutes. I've sat on a lot of boards in 25 years. That's not where real value gets added. That's where, especially, by investors, that's where investors look out for their own interests. Real value gets added when an entrepreneur is stuck and they know that they need help and they know that you can add value. Real value gets added when they invite you in, not when you pound on the door saying, I need to know some information about your business because I'm getting nervous, right? I mean, real value. I was in LA last month, and one of our entrepreneurs who's in Boston that I work closely with said, would it be okay if I fly in and stay over for a day? Because I need some help on some things. So on her own ticket at her own cost, flew across America to come and spend a day. And we rely on that. And we rely on it both at the choosing stage. I mean, I think there's a sweet spot. You want to choose an entrepreneur who's brilliant. I hope they're smarter than I am, who's going to be a great CEO. I hope better than either one of us will ever be, but also knows what they don't know, is willing to learn. Because there are a whole bunch of people who say, oh, Andreas, I'm going to want your input. And then as soon as you sign the check, they're like, oh, I know everything already. Like, we don't want those. I don't want to force my way into your business. I won't succeed anyway, right? I mean, you can hide from me. You're full-time in your business. I'm part-time in your business. So we want the people who are brilliant and confident, but who also look at us and go, wow, one of the reasons I want Exceptional Ventures is because I know they're going to be able to help me. And actually, we want them to call us. I mean, we've got one of our entrepreneurs is our next phone call. She's in the insurance business, working on reproductive health, which is a big gap in the UK and in some of the other markets. I've got a little bit of insurance background, but I'm not an InsurTech guy. Paolo's got almost no fintech background, but we know a lot about entrepreneurship. So the reason she's coming here after this meeting is to talk about her next fundraise, whether her MVP product is adequate, and it's a strategic conversation initiated by her, not by us. And I think that's one of the things that makes us different. So we started as a business, thinking like entrepreneurs with a mission, which isn't, oh, let's invest some money and see if we can turn it into some more. It's let's change human health and well-being. And then when we look for entrepreneurs, we look for people who are brilliant, but want help. And we look to be invited in, not force our way in.
Speaking of the mission of rewiring the right really bad situation we are in with health in the Western world, or if not globally, let's talk a bit about Joyspan, because that is a concept you guys have created, and I find it incredibly exciting.
Sometimes we tell the story and we make it sound like we had all this stuff when we set up. Like on day one, we knew we wanted to build a franchise.
VCs are expert at and that.
Well, but a lot of the things come later. I mean, a lot of the things come later. So, we started in this area. We believed we had real expertise. We believed we could attract great entrepreneurs, and we saw a change already happening in the world. We didn't start it, right? So people have been focusing more on how to stay well. They've been looking at the gut biome. They've been trying to detect disease earlier, understanding more about exercise, more about sleep, all of this stuff. And so there's been a gradual movement already beginning in the world to go from talking about lifespan to health span. And words are trite, but loosely what that means is that, if we've increased human lifespan from 70 to 80, but most of those years are spent in nursing homes, people that have Alzheimer's, we keep them alive, even though they've got late stage cancer, they're miserable. Well, maybe actually that's not quite the right word to use. Maybe just keeping people alive longer. It's never fair to say that that's all the existing system was doing, because that's nonsense. But, as we're simple people and we need simple labels. So, a bunch of people gradually started to think lifespan, that's not a very good word. Let's talk about health span. How do we keep people healthy and vibrant for as long as we can? But then we noticed that was giving rise to a lot of fringe science. It was giving rise to a lot of black and white. You should not drink. You should have 9 hours of sleep. You shouldn't mess up your circadian rhythms because that's terrible for you, traveling across time zones or whatever. And it was, to me, Brian Johnson typifies this. A guy who decides that he's going to eat the same number of calories every day. He's going to inject his young son's blood into himself and so forth. And so suddenly there's this popularization of...
Aren't you guys doing that too?
Well, I've got this wine cabinet behind me.
Yes.
We should come back to this at some time, because, of course, Brian Johnson in the beginning said he was only doing that for his own benefit, that it was only about him. Well, then he did a Netflix documentary, and now he's trying to sell stuff to people, using his notoriety to sell a stack of supplements that doesn't work. But putting that aside, our mission is to affect the life of many people. Most people are not going to inject their young son's blood into themselves, even if that does work. Plus, they don't need to do that. They're not eating well. They're not sleeping right. And so we did a presentation a couple of years ago to our own LPs and founders. We put up a little thing. It was a health pyramid, and it was sleep and diet and exercise and supplements and sense of purpose and connections. And we ended each section with, we went through the current state of science and knowledge in each area. What's real, what's not real, what we're sort of on the cusp of learning, but we're not sure about. And we ended each section with a very verbose statement that said, so look, you, Andreas, you should think about this area, think about what changes you want to make and are comfortable making, make some commitments, and then try to stick to them. And that was how we ended it in each section. Well, that's kind of cumbersome. And so gradually started boiling that down, and one day out comes the word Joyspan, which seems to encompass that, which says, yeah, you know what? You know that you shouldn't stay up late, you shouldn't get drunk, but you might want to anyway sometimes. I love chocolate. And so Joyspan is our way of saying, the trade-off between health, happiness, wellness that every person can make for themselves is this thing called Joyspan. And that'll be different for you than for me. I like sweets a lot more than Paolo does. He's much more willing to give that up than I am.
Yeah, and in my case, what I'm not willing to give up might be, I love sports and they can be dangerous sports, but still. So what are you willing to sacrifice in order to live longer? And what are you not? Because it really gives you joy. And that's in a way what we want to promote, right? And what we are going after with our investments.
Yeah, we've trademarked the term. Not that we necessarily want to be the only ones that use it, but we think it's a meaningful term. It's interesting because I think there's one last piece to add to that, though, which is a challenge, right? Because that would just suggest I inform people and then they make choices. And it doesn't work quite that way because we've got, a million years of evolutionary biology, which makes us short-term decision makers, right? I'm genetically programmed to save myself and my family from the bear that's attacking me right now. So we're instant gratification. So one of the challenges in the whole health and wellness sphere is that instant gratification is a bad decision maker. Like, you should be able to choose that you don't want to give up wine drinking. That doesn't mean in the moment, just because it's in front of you, you should guzzle all the wine that's there. So we want to educate people. We want to sort of push toward longer term thinking. People don't go and get themselves checked out. They don't go to the doctor until they're sick. We want to help change that too.
Can you tell me, how does this whole concept, this whole work with health and Joyspan fit into your work as a fund, both on the LP side, but maybe even also on the founder side? Because we have some, as you spoke about it earlier, the huge interest you have in mental health. There's a lot of funds that offer mental health, like they earmark some of the money that they invest to some mental health program. They have coaches on staff. They have a selection of coaches that they advise, and so on and so forth. Like, where does this fit into your model? Or is it just, we invest in this space, we run cool community events in this space, we try and inform via our LP newsletter to everyone who's interested in this, but it's not something that is built into our model in terms of both how we manage our value delivered to founders and to LPs?
The reason I sort of hesitate is it's a really interesting time to ask that question, right? I mean, the whole reason we ran that event last year was that most of our LPs at this stage are high net worths with with some interest in the area. Over time, they might be more funds that just want to diversify, or that recognize that this is a boom area. So would we take money from a non-purpose driven LP? Yeah, of course we would, because we could still deploy it into purpose. Would we invest in a non-purpose driven founder? No, not ever. Never, never, never. But we ran that whole pyramid event because we knew that those people were interested and yet wouldn't have the purview that we have. So it was not a sales event. It was an informational event. And we're now sitting and we're wrestling with, as we started this fund thinking that it would attract purpose-driven entrepreneurs, not just people who want to get rich. Isn't that great? Because we're purpose-driven. We want to play in that field. This is terrific. And it does. But now we're seeing something different. And we're seeing, because now this is becoming a mainstream thing, we're seeing funds that aren't purpose-driven go, oh my goodness, I better get into health tech. Or even more importantly and dangerously, we're seeing people, again, I don't know how much of this you'll want to use, but we see people like Brian Johnson who said it's just about me. This is for me. I want to live long. It's about me. Then there's a Netflix documentary. Now he's selling stuff. This stuff he's selling doesn't work. It's junk science and it's overpriced. We see people like David Sinclair, no kidding, eminent Harvard longevity researcher, for real scientist, chairing longevity bodies and groups and forums, who one day decides that he'd rather sell dog food that claims to de-age your pets, right? So his colleagues lambast him. He's forced to resign his chairmanships. But my running joke is he's worth 100 million pounds and they still live in campus housing. So when we think about our mission, we see a massive mission, not just for our LPs and not just for our founders, but for the world to educate, because we see more and more people. Tony Robbins, world famous self-help guru, regardless of what you think about his, have 10,000 people and have a few people walk around hot coals to show the power of the mind, has now launched health and wellness companies. These people don't know anything about health and wellness. There are 1,000 companies selling a stack of supplements. They cost 50 cents if you make them yourselves for $25, promising you'll never have a bad night's sleep again. The subject of education, of helping separate junk science from real science.
And how do you square this vision and mission with being a VC firm?
Ideally, we want to separate the science from the fiction. So we're very science-driven ourselves in our own backgrounds, as well as the team that we hired when a person is a PhD pharmacology. And one of our advisors is a world-renowned medical doctor, geneticist, co-founded a company in gene therapy. Another one is a PhD in machine learning. So we want to bring science and data into this world through the investments we make, And all our investments, therefore, are rooted into this. That's one of the reasons, for example, we don't invest in supplements. We're users ourselves, right? But we prefer investing in things that do have the proper foundation.
Well, and it can win though, right? The issue for us isn't knowing which supplements work. On some supplements, there is real evidence, but because the claims that get made by the people selling them are unregulated, it's not at all clear that the best product wins. So we think they're hard to invest in. I have no problem telling a friend what I think they should or shouldn't take and why, and trying to separate for them science and fiction, or to tell our LPs that. Andreas, we have a view that part of our role is going to be going forward, not only investing in the good guys, attracting the good guys, but calling bullshit on the bad guys. You know, and that's a weird thing to say because that's not what funds do, but it is what mission-driven business people do. And I think, you know, we're in the process of thinking about how you do that. All of those scientists that wrote nasty letters to David Sinclair and forced him to resign, they have no voice that the public hears. The public just hears the dog food company. You know, this guy in a Harvard coat stands up and says, "You love your dog, don't you? I can DH him. That's $50, please." So they fork it over and nothing happens. But we want to give voice to the real science. And we're in the process of thinking, how do we, along with the funds, how do we educate? How do we give voice to we can't be the only good guys. There are plenty of good guys out there. There are good scientists. There are good entrepreneurs. There are good government officials. There are good regulators. How do we congeal those people and say, there's real progress happening in the world? We can change the way that health is dealt with. We can help people stay well. When they do get sick, which they still will, we can find it much earlier so that we can treat it and cure it. We can develop new therapeutics. Magic can happen in the way that we treat health. Unless we let the whole thing get hijacked by charlatans, because it's complicated and it's scary, and the consumer left to his or her own devices is going to be hard-pressed to navigate it. Right? We one of our presentations, we complained about the old system that Hippocrates gave us of wait till you're sick and then go to the doctor. Well, this year we're going to do an update of that. We're going to say, remember we beat up on Hippocrates a little bit? And we said, you know, he gave us this system where we don't think about staying well and we think about the mind and body as separate. This year we're going to say, you know, we've had a little rethink in the last year. He also gave us this thing called the Hippocratic Oath. So your doctor might not be as smart as the AI machine, but your doctor's trying his best to sell you the right thing. I use a silly analogy. I go to my doctor and I say, "Doc, my chest hurts. I'll pay you $1 million to do open heart surgery." And the doctor knows I have acid reflux. 99.99% of doctors won't do that surgery. In every other industry, they will. In every other industry, if a consumer goes in and offers them a bunch of money to do the wrong thing, I'm a banker, I'm an airline, I'm a whatever, I'll do it. And then I'll say, well, I just sold the consumer what he wanted. And their wellness revolution led by commercial private businesses doesn't have the Hippocratic Oath.
I was about to ask exactly that. Is what you're saying here that you're finding that we have maybe erred too much to the purely private side when it comes to solutions to the current health crisis, and we need to find faster pathways into those that actually have taken the Hippocratic Oath?
We remain open on this question because I don't think that the existing system can be repurposed, right? I mean, rarely does the incumbent system make a jump across the divide, right? Blockbuster didn't become Netflix. Citibank didn't become Capital One, you know, and so on and so forth. So yes, I think we should work with the existing system, but I believe that there's going to be a lot of private delivery. And so somehow we need to make sure that those private deliverers are not acting out of greedy self-interest. I mean, there needs to be regulation. We think government must be involved. I'll use you a simple example. We've known for 75 years that smoking kills people. So at first we thought if we just tell them so, they'll probably stop smoking. So we said, stop smoking, it's killing you. And people smoked more. We said, well, maybe we're not telling them harshly enough. Let's put a picture of some diseased lungs on the package. Maybe then they'll stop smoking. So we did. Well, they smoked more. And we said, well, okay, let's tax it. So we taxed them, and people who can't afford to buy their kids birthday presents smoke more. And people didn't stop smoking because smoking is a habit, it's addictive, and it's instant gratification. And lung cancer is later. So people didn't stop smoking until the government stepped in and said, you can't smoke in your workplace, you can't smoke in public spaces, you can't smoke in the car with your child, and then smoking started to decline. So I think it's this complicated public private governmental circle that somehow we need to, and we want to help figure out how to organize so that the science can progress for real, because the existing system won't progress. It doesn't have the resources, the money. The science is coming from private, but it won't be delivered by people who are more concerned with getting rich than whether they're really de-aging your pet or not. And I think that we're early in this revolution, so we're not quite sure exactly how to play, except we know that that matters to us. And we know that just investing in the good guys isn't enough. We need to find some way to get governments involved, to get all the good guys, to give them a voice, to educate consumers. And that's not going to just happen by finding the investors and finding companies and sticking them together, which is what VCs do. That's not enough. I mean, we could comfort ourselves and say we only invest in the good guys, but somebody else is funding Tony Robbins and Brian Johnson and David Sinclair, and we want to scream about that.
Andreas, we trust that you will edit certain parts of this interview at a certain before publishing.
We're going to put Darth Vader voices on some of the naming and shaming here.
Well, we're doing a presentation. I think I'm sure you've been invited in April. It's going to be our update. Last year was the health and wellness pyramid. This year, we're going to talk about that. We're going to remind people about that. But we also, the Revolution books, we're going to start talking more this year about early diagnosis, not just staying well, but you can't stay well forever, right? You're going to get cancer or dementia. So get it found out early. So we're going to talk a lot more about early screening and stuff. And we're going to talk about this. And that's our analogy. Paolo talked about separating science from fiction. I'm a science fiction fan and I love pop culture. So we're going to do a lot of Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker. We're going to do a lot of, this can be like lots of things, can be a force for good or ill, right? A lot of people are going to get rich. Well, okay, I'm good with that. I'm a capitalist. As long as they're guys who are going to get rich for doing good stuff in the world, adding value, right? We live in a capitalist world. That's fine with me.
Yeah, and I think that exactly is hugely important when you're acting in this space. Gentlemen, we could have gone on and on and on, but now we're up on time. We will do more episodes together. I'm super happy. We will do one as a follow-up to this one where we dive specifically into exceptional ventures from a more usual pitch concept style conversation. And I look forward to that because you've got so many ambitions and visions, and I'm looking forward to see how you bring it all into one fund and show that to everyone.
So are we. In this whole subject of how do you do more than the investment side? Are you familiar with Which in the UK, the consumer advocacy group that evaluates products and services? I was on the board of Which a few years ago. I had dinner the other night with the guy who was the CEO there when I was there. He's unusually commercial for a guy in that field. He was a McKinsey partner. He was at Unilever. And we're talking about this whole issue of how do you steer this revolution in science and technology and wellness toward the good side? We've talked about, do you set up a foundation, a not-for-profit? Is it part of us, or are we one of many sponsors? Do we coordinate all the good guys so that those people that hate David Sinclair have a voice together instead of just writing a letter that nobody reads? So we don't know how to do it. But I think since last year, one of our big realizations has been left to itself. It started as purpose-driven, and then a bunch of the other guys went, if I want to get rich, it's not fintech anymore, it's health tech. Okay, good. And the consumer is desperate, and science is complex, so I can lie, and I can sell stuff. I'm being extreme, but that's what we see. We see ridiculous junk science claims. We see things that are 50 times the price they should be. And we look at this, we go, we can't let this happen. And we don't know yet what our role in that is and who we want to help us. But we know that it's not enough just to do what we started out doing, which was say, let's find investors who care and the best purpose-driven entrepreneurs. It's like one piece of this thing.
The next episode, I definitely would love to explore more of these from our side, and also would love to know more about your journey into bodybuilding, because I know you're picking up. You're picking up again, so you're gonna.
I'm picking up. I'm 76 kilos now. I'm hoping, and I'm 35. I just turned 35 a few days ago, so I'm hoping by my 40th birthday I'll be 92 again, which I'm not sure whether I can make.
I wish that there was a way. So I was a very skinny little kid introduced to the gym very late. And when I started, I just wanted to be bigger. So I used to read all the bodybuilding magazines in the late 80s. Never happened. Never was going to happen. Now I'm old and fat. So if I could give you 10 kilograms, you could have it. It just wouldn't be what you want. We had Arnold Schwarzenegger, a bunch of Arnold Schwarzenegger clips in our video last year.
Yeah. Well, I love that guy. Anyone who hasn't seen Pumping Iron should definitely go and watch it. It's
A
great
million
entertainment.
times, a million times. And Andreas, look, I mean, one of these, frankly, look, this all works in two ways. So offline from the podcast, we're trying to figure out how one steers this in the right direction, how one protects the consumer and the world and makes it a better place and makes the real science trump the fake science, makes the purpose-driven guys trump the greedy guys. And we're talking to anybody we can talk to figure out how to tell the story, access the government, access the science. Peter's on the board of the British Medical Journal, the guy from which we're talking about whether they mostly speak to doctors, but would they do an issue on the state of wellness in the world? What's real and what, we don't know how to do this yet. So we're not ready to tell the world how we're going to do it. We're in a learning phase. I mean, we can talk about why we think we're the best VC and why we think this matters, but we could have an offline conversation and would love to pick your brains and say, okay, how would you steer this in the right direction?
That is an open invitation for everyone listening in as well, I am sure. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andreas. Great to see you.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.